Jeff Welton has been with Nautel for more than 33 years, starting as a field service technician and customer service rep, then moving to sales in 2007. He's written several papers on facility grounding and lightning protection, as well as on-site maintenance and improvement. And with that, Jeff, I give the stage to you.
So William asked me, he goes, is there any way you can talk about the things that people don't think about with RF? It's like, I guess. I mean, rule number one, it burns. So here's the dumb question. Anybody here not ever had an RF burn? Never had an RF burn? Anybody want to volunteer and say, no, I've never had an RF burn? One, two, not too darn many. Hurts, doesn't it? And it keeps hurting for quite a while. So that's rule number one. I told William, I said, I'm going to put Ohm's law up. And he goes, I think that might be a little too simple for this crowd. And I said, that's okay. It's one slide. That's my next tattoo. If I ever decide to get a next tattoo, that'll be the one. This right here, we live and die. Everything we do in our jobs is because of this. Okay, everything is E equals I times R, one way or another. If the volts go up, the current go down, assuming the load stayed the same. Okay, and that's the kind of thing that we always need to keep in the back of our mind. I told somebody, even the IT stuff, unless you're running over a piece of glass, it's still E equals I times R, and even then, at one end or the other, or both, it is going to be. When you get to the RF, then you start to get to the nonlinear stuff. We start throwing squares and square roots and all that fancy stuff. And that's important too. But it's not real critical for most of the FM and TV stuff. The high frequency stuff, you get a chunk of pipe. How long that pipe is and how big around and whether there's a bar in it determines whether it's a filter, a conductor, a capacitor, or an inductor, or whatever. But it's not like you're going to go in there and retune the thing as a rule. There are some things, and I know that the guys from Katrine and AAT will be talking about tuning stuff, I think. I see tunable stuff here, so I'm going to assume there's some show and tell. So that's something else we need to think of. Number one rule. Anybody here fairly new to RF who come from the IT field? Most of us have been doing this for a bit. So there you go. Well, post-production audio is just RF at a lower frequency and a lot less watts. Break it into smaller pieces. Everything. Break it into bite-sized pieces. It's a whole lot. It's real frightening to walk up to a box that's 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide and making a big loud purring sound and had a bunch of lights and some of them are red and it isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. Break it into bite-sized pieces. What's your bite-sized pieces? Every transmitter on the planet is made of the same 5 blocks. AM, FM, shortwave, TV, I don't care. Cell transmitter, same 5 blocks for everything. Okay, all you got to do is figure out what block the problem's in, and you're already 80% of the way to solving it. And that's the kind of thing. Like I said, you look at that big box and it's got the red lights and everything's just glowing at you and not doing what it's supposed to be. It gets really overwhelming. 5 blocks. Once you do that, it gets a lot simpler. Gary, I stole some of your slides. So, but I left your logo. The old, that's the old logo. I'm sorry. That's what happens when I steal your stuff. So Gary did a really good series with the SBE year or two ago on RF 101. And the only reason I put this in here is because the wavelength portion is really important for what we do. And that's the kind of thing. Anybody here work with AM besides David? I know there's a few. I see Joby back there and Paxton. Hey, Paxton. Hey, Joby. See, this is what happens when I come down here. I see people I haven't seen for months. NAB, I think, right? Yeah. So The wavelength's important, especially on AM. I'll give you an example. So I was working on a 50 kilowatt AM back home a little while ago. I had a customer out there with me. And we're outside the main phaser, and there's a big honking 3 1/8 inch cable going over to the ATU for one of the other towers. Now, where I live, bedrock starts at ground level, okay? So we don't bury cables without dynamite. Usually we string them up in the air, and there was a messenger cable. Well, for some dumb reason, known only to the person who did it, one end of that cable was grounded. That cable was about 300 feet long on a 680 kilohertz AM. So my customer put his hand up on that coax at the other end, and you know what you got when you got 300 feet at 680 kilohertz, you got an antenna. Funny thing about antennas, they will transmit and receive equally well and just as painfully. And yeah, he come back with a really good burn. When you get into the higher frequencies, let's skip ahead a few, those wavelengths tend to get a lot shorter. I like this picture just because it's 5 feet. That's how high my wife is. I showed her this. The response was not exactly as funny as I thought it was. And like when you're into the gigahertz, now you're down into inches. Okay, wavelength is important because when you look at an FM filter or a TV filter, it's a chunk of pipe. That's all it is. And how long it is determines how many degrees of phase shift, et cetera, and so on. When you're talking about AM, and we've got a 2 megawatt AM in Hungary, there is no tuning unit for that system. It is all done with open wire feeder. There's no coax, open wire. You imagine building an ATU for a half wave antenna with open wire for the L and the C? It's pretty spectacular. It covers a lot of land. But again, the theory doesn't change. RF is RF, audio at a higher frequency. Let's skip back a sec. This one is only critical because, of course, a coax, as an example, feed and return with the electromagnetic field. It's why on open line feeders for AM, they're spaced apart a certain distance to cut down on the mutual coupling. Is that the right word, Gary? I'm going to make you nod here. This is interactive. You're going to make me interrupt these people through lunch. Boy, we're going to have some fun with it. So again, what are your frequency ranges? Well, most of what we do is going to be in medium high, very high, and ultra high. Although when, again, you get into some of the satellite stuff and the microwave links, it goes up into the high end too. And there are different considerations. The reason that the wavelength is important is if you look at 9.8 gigahertz as an example, or if you've got a 40 gig microwave link, you know, the IT link, a raindrop is a pretty good fraction of a wavelength at that point. That can be an issue. You know, why does KU band not play so well in a rainstorm? Is it KU or C? See, I don't speak this stuff very well, so I'm going to rely on people smarter than me again. So the things that we don't tend to consider, and I'm going to start it like it's super basic, but AM, okay, you have an audio signal or a message. You have the carrier. You put the audio on the carrier. The farther it goes bigger, the louder it is, okay? Pretty basic stuff. Why that's important? So that carrier signal determines your output power, of course. But your peak to peak on the carrier plus audio is what determines the peak power and the peak voltage, which is what determines where stuff blows up. I can't tell you how many times back in the day I've had somebody put a 50 kilowatt load on a 50 kilowatt transmitter, but it was 50 kilowatts not allowing for modulation. Almost everybody now, when they size a load, for AM especially, it specs the modulation on, adds 50%. You got to be aware of that. If you're building an ATU, that's important. It's going to get a little scarier in a bit because let's go IBOC. So here's what an analog signal looks like, okay? Pretty basic, plus or minus 10, you get a little slop over there on the mask, but not a lot. So we throw IBOC on, and we're into the next sideband. So we're down quite a ways, but it's a potential issue. And then we'll go one step further and go all digital. Well, we're back into our 10 kilohertz again. Okay, and I know David's done probably way more playing with this than I ever will, but it's something to be aware of, because an AM HD signal is the reason that a lot of them aren't running it at night. I don't think there's not a lot of AM HDs left anyway, but there are a few still. And you've got to pay attention. If you're running a hybrid HD signal, the bandwidth you require from the antenna system is significantly more than what you would require from an analog signal. Okay, the spec, and David can correct me if I'm wrong, the spec used to be within 1.4 to 1 SWR plus or minus 15 kilohertz from the carrier. Is that right? Just nod, I know it's right. What's that? Right. So here's where it becomes an issue. And David mentioned Hermitian symmetry, meaning the sidebands got to be balanced. I would rather see the sidebands balanced than the center at 50J0. If you get the center off of 50 a little bit and get balanced sidebands, that's going to give you better performance. The funny thing is it's going to give you better performance on an analog AM signal too. Okay, Carl Smith wrote that paper in 1958, I think it was. You can still find the PDF online talking about tuning AM directional arrays. Awesome information. Funny thing is, the cool thing about this job, physics doesn't change much. The stuff, what's that? Well, you know, you throw HD in there, now we're adding bits and bytes, so a little bit. The physics doesn't change, the signal may. But when we start throwing the further out in the sidebands, you've got to accommodate for that when you're setting up an antenna system, okay? I bring this up because more and more we're going to see, I think, a few more HDs here and there. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. I'm not here to judge or say one's better than the other, but there are some benefits to it. So what about FM? Well, FM is easy, right? We just move the frequency back and forth. So instead of being at 96.3, it might be 96.31 or 96.299 or whatever. How far you move it is your audio amplitude. How fast you move it's the audio frequency. Easy breezy. Okay? Nothing really much to consider here until we throw HD at it. The HD carriers are amplitude modulated onto the FM carrier. You remember on that AM wave, I mentioned the peak voltage and peak power? Now we've got to deal with that again. That impacts us in two ways. Transmitter power headroom, that's my side, or the Gates Air side, or the BE, or Rhodey, or whoever you got. Okay, everybody has a slightly different way of expressing it. Like if you look at our spec sheets, it will tell you we will do this many watts of analog power at a certain injection level. Okay, Gates Air spec sheet will tell you it will do this many watts of total power, analog plus HD. Saying the same thing, it's just pay attention, do the math, so make sure you got it right. So the power headroom has an impact. At minus 20 with the peak to average power reduction algorithm used in the current HD system, it's not that big. You can pretty much run faceplate power at minus 20. As you get up there into the minus 10 and the HD only, that capability goes way down. I'll give you an example at minus 14. So your HD power is 4% of your analog. We can accommodate roughly 90% of faceplate. So a 20 kilowatt transmitter at minus 14 HD injection is an 18 kilowatt transmitter of analog power, okay? And again, it'll vary slightly from one manufacturer to the next, but that's a fairly good guideline. Okay, the other thing to remember, any TV folks in the room? Y'all familiar with MER, of course. What does MER affect more than anything? Coverage area. Coverage area and interference. Because we are modulating with quadrature phase shift keying data carriers and binary phase shift keying the reference carriers, we've got MER, okay, modulation error ratio. So modulation error ratio, whoops, back up a little. If you looked at the quadrature, where the carrier should land in that mythical perfect world versus where it does land in your particular system, that's the error ratio. How far apart are those? Okay, the closer it is to a dot, the better. If you ever look at the quadrature diagram constellation for an HD signal, for FM HD, you'll see 4 almost like diamonds fanning out at the corners. The tighter those are, the better your MER. Okay, some manufacturers will let you to click on the carriers and see the specific MER. Some will give you an overall MER reading. General rule of thumb, better you can make it, the better off your coverage is going to be for your HD signal. What impacts that? Lots of stuff. Transmitter linearity, amplifier linearity, filter tuning, bandwidth. If you got a short space channel combiner, that can cause issues. Group delay, all those things can impact MER. Some of it can be compensated with pre-distortion in the transmitter, depending, again, different manufacturers, different ways of attacking it, but some are different than others, but it can be done. Something else to pay attention to. If you put up an HD system, as an example, your general rule of thumb is 14 dBc of HD carrier, 4% digital power versus analog, should give you solid city grade coverage. Okay, out to your 65 dBu-ish. If you go -10, in most cases, and it's dependent, of course, on terrain because FM is line of sight, but if you go to -10 where the digital power is 10%, you should have solid coverage out to your 54 dBu, and in a lot of cases, it'll go further. Mr. Lair, am I about right on that? So he and I got to hang around a lot of cow pastures and cornfields doing AM HD testing about 10 or 11 years ago. And I'll tell you what, you've never seen anything till you've watched him and Mike Raid pull into a transmitter site with four Ford Broncos and immediately start disassembling the dash and the door panels to wire in all the test gear. Bet nobody told Avis about that after the fact. So what do you need to know? Okay, so this is the summary page of the spreadsheet that we use. If you call me up and say, I've got a 15 kilowatt station and I've got about 100 feet of 1 5/8 line, what size transmitter do I need? Well, there's going to be a bunch of dumb questions. How many bays do you got? What's the base spacing? Understand this is all for non-directional. If you got a directional signal, I'm going to send you straight to Corey or to Dale or to whoever your favorite antenna person is, because I will not give you the gain of a directional antenna. I haven't got a freaking clue. I will defer to the experts every single time, okay? And that's probably the biggest thing about this industry. More than anything, it's not, I told somebody, I don't need to know the answers. I just need to know somebody smarter than me who does. Okay, so, I mean, I'll reach out to somebody smarter. And like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of those people out there. But here are the kind of things that you do need to pay attention to. And again, if you're doing digital, you got to look at the peak power. More than that, in some cases, you got to look at the peak voltage. Okay, I threw one of the questions in for the roundtable, and I'll leave it out there for later. But this is kind of critical. I ran into a case one day where we were putting an HD signal out. We sold them the transmitter. But before I sold them the transmitter, because I'm an inquisitive sort of person, I said, what do you got for an antenna? Because I just want to double check the TPO. So he told me he had a 4-bay full wave, and I forget whose it was, but it was one that had a nominal 10 kilowatt input. And he's got a 9 kilowatt analog input level, and he wanted to run -10 HD. And he goes, so that's 9,900 watts, right? And I said, no. Because the peak envelope power of 10% HD, so if you get 9,000 watts of analog, 10% of course is 900 watts. Well, peak envelope power of 900 watts, because it's an AM signal, is 3,600. 3,600 plus 9,000 is 12,600, which is about 25% over the input rating of the antenna. Okay, that's the kind of questions that you need to pay attention to. So that's just peak power. You also had to look at peak voltage rating of coax, of connectors, elbows, every part of the chain. Okay, so that's the kind of thing those are the things that I think trip more people up than anything, especially, look, these days, so TM or TV, you got, even in DTV, you got an AM and a FM component. In HD radio now, you got an AM and an FM component. If you're an AM HD, you've got your AM analog, and your digital carriers are phase modulated. Really, the only difference between them anymore is getting to be the frequency, the wavelength, okay? And the various, how much peak power. Okay, so a lot of the math, whether TV, whether FM, whether AM, doesn't change. It's just how big's the wavelength? How much do we have to worry about this stuff? I'm not reading the wall of text. Y'all know how to read. If anybody wants a copy of this, William's got it now, and I very cheerfully, full permission, you can distribute it to anybody who wants it. Shoot me an email. I'm pretty easy to find, I think. Okay, but this is the kind of thing that that I think we miss the most, is, I say, the peak power stuff. And that's, I know I beat the drum over and over and over, but it's the stuff that I get more calls on than anything. That, and the fact that on FM, I still will get calls from folks who maybe should know a little better sometimes, not mentioning any names. I don't think there's any of them in this room. So if you are in this room, understand that I'm not calling you out on purpose. I get a call from a guy on a regular basis. I need a 25 kilowatt transmitter. Cool, what's your call sign? You give me the call sign. Well, if I go to fccinfo.com, thank you, Cavell and Mertz, for that website, by the way. If you don't know fccinfo.com, it is amazing. Now, unfortunately, if you click through any other applications right now, because of a certain political situation, you're not going to find anything because there's no data to look for. All LMS and everything else shut down. That's a whole different discussion. But so I go to Cavell and Mertz. This guy says I need a 25 kilowatt transmitter. Well, if I go to their call sign and it says they have an ERP of 25 kilowatts, I'm immediately going to raise my eyebrows and say, what's your TPO? 25 kilowatts. How many bays on your antenna? Well, I don't know. I had a call last night. Guy sent me an email, said I need a quote for a 5 kilowatt transmitter. What's your TPO? 4,800 watts into a 2-bay. Okay, cool. I look up the call sign, and Cavell Mertz says, no, you need 2.3 kilowatt TPO because it's got an ERI 4-bay. Well, at this point, I'm curious. So Cavell Mertz also provides me the latitude, longitude. The FCC has a nice little DMS converter, so I can convert from degrees, minutes, seconds into decimal degrees, which I can then paste into Google Maps, go to Street View, and look and say, oh, there's only 2 bays on that tower. I do this every single day. Okay? I called customer back and I said, you said you needed 4,800 watts. Why does the license say that there's a 4-bay? And why does Google Earth say that there's a 2-bay? He goes, what call sign did I give you? And I told him, he goes, oh crap, that's not the right one. He was looking for the whole wrong station. So he gave me the right call sign, and son of a gun, if the numbers didn't all line up at that point. So again, due diligence. Everywhere we go, due diligence. Oh, I'm almost done anyway. Gee, look, I'll click this one. There, bang, other information. Any questions or thoughts? Any time where you've messed something up and think everybody else could benefit from learning how not to do that? Because I'm here to tell you, I learned my best lessons when there's fire.
Thank you very much, Jeff Welton. Excellent.